Hello and welcome to today's webinar we've titled Bobbi's Briefing, Don't Be in Denial About Your Denials. My name is Taylor and I'm part of the marketing team here at RxVantage. Before I introduce our speakers, I have a few things to go over in terms of housekeeping. The questions and chat feature is available during the webinar. Feel free to use those both throughout the presentation. I will be fielding the questions and hopefully there will be time at the end to answer a few. If not, we will have them answered on a one-on-one basis through email. Today's webinar will be recorded and all attendees will receive a link to the recording as well as the slide presentation after the webinar. With that, we will get started here in a few minutes and give people a little opportunity to hop on. If you are just now joining us, thank you for attending today's webinar. Again, my name is Taylor and I'm a part of the marketing team here at RxVantage, a free online platform that connects medical practices with life science resources. Our presenters today are Tracy Lewis, founder and president of OnPoint Oncology, and Paul Welchins, a principal of OnPoint Oncology. In 2021, OnPoint Oncology became a division of RxVantage, which builds on RxVantage's rapidly expanding digital offerings for providers. OnPoint Oncology relies on groundbreaking claims analysis technology that has extensive experience understanding and actively managing the complex challenges in oncology care. Its industry-leading reimbursement surveillance product addresses the needs of providers, patients, and life science companies. With that, I'll hand it off to Tracy Lewis to begin today's webinar.
Hey everybody, my name is Tracy Lewis, and I'm a partner with OnPoint Oncology, and I'm here with my partner Paul Welchins, who is also, I wanted to correct that, a founder in OnPoint Oncology. Say hi, Paul.
Hi everybody. Good afternoon. I almost said good morning, but depending on what time zone you're in, I say both.
Exactly, and Paul will be flipping the slides because I can't be trusted with it. So together with our other partner, Bobbi Buell, who's also on the call listening to us and probably making fun of us, who generally educates you guys, we comprise OnPoint Oncology, where we do high-value claim and payer surveillance each and every day. Everyone works in their own bubble, and we thought it would be helpful to take a step outside of your office and take a macro look at the high-value oncology claims from the buy and bill community oncology market. Show you guys some of the most common denials by payer segment. Why community oncology, you may ask? We feel like this is the tip of the spear for buy and bill activity, and you'll see many of the denials that plague all of your practices. So Paul, hit that slide.
All right, let's do this. Oh, hold on. Sorry, Trace. There we go. Now.
So just some statistics from community oncology from our data set. We looked at over 9 million payer responses, just over 500,000 distinct patients, and over 3 million distinct claims to come up with this analysis. So go ahead, Paul, next one. And this just gives you an overview of the payer mix that we're looking at. So given that it's community oncology and there isn't a lot of Medicaid patients seen there, you'll see that sliver is kind of small. But overall, the rest of the payer mix should reflect what you see in your practices. Medicare, 43%, commercial, other, we call it 20%, Blue Cross, 15%, and Medicare Advantage, or as Bobby would refer to it, Medicare Disadvantage, 20%. Next. And then looking at denial rate by payer segment. This is always an eye opener to my friends outside of oncology when I share with them that Medicare is the best payer as far as denial rates go. Checking in for high value claims at a 4.1% denial rate. Commercial and Blue Cross 13.14%. Medicare Advantage 9.03, and Medicaid a whopping 20.6. And that's because of the complexities of billing Medicaid and just the fact that many oncology offices don't see a lot of Medicaid patients. Next. So I'm going to pass the torch to Paul, my partner Paul here, for Blue Cross and Commercial for his overview.
All right, thanks, Trace. So we thought we'd start out by looking at this payer segment because it's a very interesting payer segment. As you saw from the previous slide, with a relatively high denial percentage overall for oncologics in particular. Bear in mind that these are all buy and bill oncologics, and so that's the data that we are able to pull. So there are no oral medications in here. We usually group Blue Cross Blue Shield and commercial separately because we find that Blue Cross Blue Shield Blue Cross Blue Shield plans tend to behave in a coherent fashion, meaning they do a lot of the same things, use a lot of same denials, those sort of things. So we'll take a look and you'll actually see what I mean when I go through some of these denial reasons that are utilized for these particular payer segment, for this particular payer segment. So in terms of the top denial reasons, now obviously there are multiple denial reasons that they utilize, but these are the 4 largest, and these are listed in order. You can see that code 252, which is basically there's an attachment missing from the claim, is number 1. Prior auth, which we'll get into for a relatively in-depth conversation because it's such an interesting one, is also near the top, and it tends to be across all patient segments, except of course for Medicare, or payer segments, I should say. And then code 16, which is where something is missing on the claim, or there's something that's incorrect or invalid, as they say here. And then 96, which is that non-covered charge denial that we see where you have to refer to remark codes to know specifically what that is. So if we want to get into a little bit more in depth in terms of what they mean, here's what we're talking about. So denial code 252. Now this is interesting, and if you notice that the top 4 Blue Cross Blue Shield / commercial payers using this code are all Blue Cross Blue Shield payers, starting with Florida Blue Shield, not a big surprise, California Blue Cross, Anthem Blue Cross, and Arkansas Blue Shield. So I mentioned before that Blue Cross Blue Shield tend to use the same denial codes, and this seems to be a favorite of those in particular. Not that they're the only ones that utilize this, but they utilize it on a regular basis. And it literally says an attachment / other documentation is required to adjudicate this claim / service. And what we do here is when they're asking for more documentation, obviously you want to find out what that is. So you need to check the remark code and then send over what they need. Typically for Blue Cross Blue Shield, we see this used pretty heavily utilized as sort of a stall tactic, meaning they probably received in some way, shape, or form some information on the patient, be it during the prior auth process or something of that sort. But they'll also ask for the full patient medical record with the submission of the claim. So a little tip, if you have a Blue Cross Blue Shield payer that's in your area and you're filing a claim, it's not a bad idea to include the full patient medical record, even though they don't specify that they want it necessarily attached. But the number 1 in terms of the remark code is missing patient medical record for this service. And you can see it's literally about 4 times larger than, actually 5 times larger than the next one, which says consult our contractual agreement for restrictions, billing payment information related to these charges. Normally, these are kind of this is a throw-on add-on remark code. First, they'll say, hey, we need the full patient medical record. Then they'll just throw in that they, by the way, always take a look at your contract to see what anything there is. Sometimes, and very rarely, we do see it as the only remark code that's on the claim, in which case it leaves it open to interpretation for you to figure out exactly what's going on there. And then last but not least, in terms of the top three anyway, is missing certificate of medical necessity, which again could tie back to the prior auth, because if you received a prior authorization, why would you need a certificate of medical necessity? This is largely Florida Blue Cross Blue Shield that utilizes this particular remark code associated with denial code 252. Why, we're not exactly sure, but tends to be, again, the answer there is to kind of stall and hang on to the cash a little bit longer so that they can enjoy the cash a little bit longer. Now, if you look at denial code 197, now this one's really interesting, right? So we see this across all payer segments, of course, except for Medicare, and the top four, I guess, users of this denial are United Healthcare is number one, not necessarily because they're the worst, but also because they're the largest. So but they do tend to use it a great deal. Ambetter from Sunshine Health, which is in Florida, that's part of Centene. Ambetter was purchased by all the Ambetter plans were purchased by Centene a while ago. Florida Blue Shield and Iowa Blue Shield. So again, we see some Blue Shield in here, but we start to see some commercial payers, i.e. United Healthcare and Centene, kind of come into the mix. And this basically says that the prior authorization is absent. Not necessarily always the case, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide, but basically the solution here is if the payer is unable to pay because of prior auth or it's missing, obviously then you just resubmit it. There are some other potential causes of this denial that we do see, and I'm sure if you were able to, you could chime in, but quite often it literally means that they didn't obtain the PA. We do hear from some practices that they're told that they don't need a prior authorization, and then once they submit the claim, they're like, your prior authorization is missing, and that does happen relatively frequently. Very commonly, we see information on the claim that had something different that was given on the prior authorization. It could be something like a middle initial. It could be something like it's still let's say the patient is a lung cancer patient and they were approved for one ICD-10 code for lung cancer and another one was used. That may cause that for them to say that's not the same patient, therefore they don't have a prior auth, so it must be missing. Sometimes, and relatively frequently, that's a wrong PA number is actually written on the claim. And then, as I mentioned before, they're told we don't need one. We also have had some conversations, and Tracy, I'm going to ask you to chime in on this since you're the one who actually had the conversation about this gold stamp prior authorization. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, we were at Community Oncology Alliance's conference in Orlando, and Dr. McEnany, who's a prominent oncologist in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is, just very upset about the whole, the whole prior auth hoop that they have to jump through. And it's like her comment was that they've obtained prior auths all year for specific patients across many disease types, and not once have you ever told me that I cannot use it. So why do we need this? So there's a little bit of a uprising amongst community oncologists around, maybe perhaps gold stamping some of these prior authorizations so that when used appropriately, they don't get questioned each time.
It seems like that would cause the process to become a lot quicker, and therefore I don't know if that's something that they want to do, you know what I mean, in terms of payers selfishly behaving. That might not be something they want to do, but I love the idea, and we'll see if that comes to fruition or not. All right, so the third one, denial code 16. I'm sure you guys have all seen these in the past because obviously they're quite common. And here are our top offenders for denial code 16, and that is Florida Blue Shield again. You'll notice they will rise to the top quite often. United Healthcare for the same reason. TRICARE East and Horizon New Jersey Health, my lovely home state. Claims, so it literally reads claim/service lacks information or has submission/billing errors needed for adjudication. Fortunately, these come with remark codes as well. And so you basically need to read whatever that remark code is, find out what the information they're claiming is invalid or has errors or missing, and then take the necessary action. So let's take a look at some of the top remark codes under denial code 16. Those include missing, incomplete, invalid, deactivated, withdrawn. I love that they put so many different options. Withdrawn NDC code or National Drug Code. This is very common, and it tends to change, particularly with United Healthcare saying, oh, we want them, and then they'll say, oh, you don't need them anymore, and then they'll say, oh, we wanted them before, and so they kind of seesaw back and forth. So it's better just to include the NDC code on all claims. That's what we tend to advise folks to do, because it's one of those things where you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it, if you will. So that's kind of the case with the NDC codes. And then the next one is interesting, is missing, incomplete, invalid name, strength, or dosage of the drug furnished. This tends to be around the billed unit amounts. Sometimes people are told to put a 1, sometimes they need to put it obviously 1 milligram per whatever, based on the billed units for that particular J code drug. And there are a lot of errors. Quite often when there's some that, for example, that are, 1 billed unit equals 10 or 0.5 and not the usual 1-to-1, we will see some errors there. So just pay careful attention to that when you're billing and coding your claim. And then last but not least, the fourth one is denial code 96. This is always a fun one because it just says non-covered charge, right? So that doesn't tell you a whole heck of a lot. But interestingly enough, if you look at the top 4, there's our good friend Florida Blue Shield again. Now you see Tennessee Blue Shield tends to like that as well. United Healthcare and Iowa Blue Shield. So we see a lot of the same regular offenders, if you will, and under non-covered charge, it actually, that's all it says, or sometimes, it'll say non-covered charge is in parentheses. Check the remark code, find out why the service isn't covered. It is hopefully will tell you something. The remark codes tend to be semi-vague sometimes. You can, the biggest thing for us is if you've given a higher than the labeled dose, we'll see something there relatively frequently. And then is it some sort of contract problem or unbundling? Those sort of things occur in terms of remark codes. We'll see that as well too. We see a decent amount of things like that. And if it's a drug, which is what this data tracks, and the patient is rendered uninsured, then you contact patient assistance. So we'll see denials for that under code 96, and then the remark codes will specify those a little bit. So here are the top remark codes that we see under denial code 96. One is correction to a prior claim. So that could be a couple of different things. Sometimes it's actually a duplicate claim. Sometimes it's other things where they actually corrected a prior claim. Usually it's a correction on the payment amount or lack thereof. And then patient ineligible for this service doesn't tell you a whole lot because it doesn't really tell you why the patient's ineligible for this service, but it could be something as simple as a misunderstanding of the actual patient's insurance, or it could be something to do with the drug, and the technicalities could be the histology, could be some sort of companion diagnostic, et cetera, that's attached to that. And then something we mentioned before, which is the number of days or units of service exceeds our acceptable maximum. And that is pretty self-explanatory, where they have some sort of issue with the dose or the dosing schedule. So we'll see that under code 96. And those are your most relatively common denials for commercial and Blue Cross. And I find it kind of interesting. So we see a lot of stuff that are in common with a lot of the same payers. And we're going to move on now to Medicare. And again, just a reminder, please post all your questions if you have some. And so we're gonna move on to Medicare, and I will pass the torch, as they say, back to Tracy. Take it away, Trace.
Thanks a lot, Paul. So Medicare is a little bit, obviously a lot less denials, but we still have them. And we're just going to go through the top reasons why we're denying for Medicare. So hit the next one, Paul. So number one, by pretty long shot, is denial code 16. So claim service lacks information, has submission billing errors, which Paul just went through. But just as a side note for you guys, and this is what's happening, I think, with a lot of folks having the turnover in the billing office, these 16s are just basically clerical errors. And we're going to walk through some of those in a minute. Non-covered services, because this is not deemed medical necessity. Again, we're talking about high value oncology claims. So 50s is they see that as a difference for them for not medical necessity, which I'll explain that in just a second. Service or equipment drug not covered under the current patient's current benefit plan, a 204. and then payment adjusted because the payer deems the information submitted does not support this many or frequency of services. Much less, though. You see that's a third less than 16s, which are clerical errors. Go ahead, Paul, next. So the 16s, we went through this already, but move to the next one. The reasons for 16, again, you may not appeal this decision. That's part of, that's an add-on remark code in general. Missing, incomplete, invalid rendering provider primary identifier. This is a big one. Just adding, simply putting in the correct provider number for that patient, and then missing, incomplete, invalid billing provider supplier primary identifier. Same thing. Just again, probably check-in procedures or just making sure that you have the right patient associated with the right provider. Next. Denial code 50, these are, this is a medical necessity. Now, this happens a lot with high value claims. So basically, Medicare is determining that the utilization of this drug is off label. It may be off label and you may have to support while you're using it, but it may not be off label. You may have put the wrong diagnosis code in that's not attached to that specific product, in both cases. Next. Underneath denial code 50, you'll see the information furnished does not substantiate this need for level of service. That's the most popular by a long shot. So basically, you have to establish the need for that level. And then the NCDs and LCDs, they're all near and dear to our heart. Basically, they're just quoting out the coverage decisions that decide whether that drug can be used for that specific disease. Next. This is denial code 204. So this service equipment not covered under the patient's current benefit plan. Notice here for all these slides we have, basically the practice solution, which in this case the patient does not have a benefit for the product or service billed. If it's a pharmacy benefit, which in this case is not, check to see if the drug can be switched to a major medical benefit or to a specialty pharmacy benefit. Many of these, and we've seen this over the last couple of years. Going back to that Medicare disadvantage. So we've seen a lot of shift from Medicare to Medicare Advantage because the private payers are advertising this on TV now. And there's been a 9% increase from 2021 to 2022 on folks moving from Medicare to Medicare Advantage, which creates a lot of these 204s. So what's happened is the patient comes in and you ask them if their insurance has changed, and they're still on Medicare in their eyes, so they say no, it's not changed, but truly it has changed because they've moved to Medicare Advantage. And then when you start billing, you start to see these types of denials. Next. Now code 251, payment is adjusted because the payer deems the information does not support this many or frequency of service. Another very common one, usually associated with a medically unlikely edit. Paul, do you want to share what that is?
Oh, sure. So medically unlikely edit, for those of you that don't know, there's a list of drugs that have these. Not all of them do, but most of them. Basically where they say the maximum, and it's largely for weight-based dose drugs, but not necessarily including, it does have some flat-based dose drugs on there, where they say basically the largest dose you would potentially give that's still medically likely is X amount. And based on what that amount is, if you go over it, then it could affect it will get denied for this code 151, affecting the medically unlikely edit. They'll say it's medically unlikely that you use this much, basically is what they're saying, and we'll see that denial code pop up. And we saw that actually for a couple of drugs, Opdivo, when it switched to from every 2-week dose to every 4, or was it 6? I can't remember because I'm mixing it up with Keytruda, but you get the idea. And so the dose became double and it went over the MUE, and even though it had been corrected and FDA approved, it still had sort of a grace period before that got corrected in the literature. And so we saw a decent amount of these code 151 medically unlikely edits. That was a few years ago. We haven't really seen much of that since because I think it's been corrected. But that's a good example. But we still see somewhere, particularly weight-based dose drugs, where they go over the what they would consider medically likely because, well, frankly, the patient's may be quite obese, and if it's a weight-based drug, they go over that number sometimes, and hence we see this denial code.
And Paul, take the baton and handle Medicare Advantage next.
Oh yeah, right. Okay, so this is a fun one. So Medicare Advantage, as you know, is basically Medicare by commercial plans. So, and Tracy mentioned some of the things in terms of the growth of this particular payer segment. And as a result, we see a lot of commonalities with the denials for commercial that we see with Medicare Advantage. Maybe not in the same order, but you can see it's generally the same ones. Like if you remember back to commercial Blue Cross Blue Shield, which all of 5 or 10 minutes ago, you can see that the denial reasons are actually the same. They're just in a different order. So you can see 13% of those are for code 16, which we've talked about ad nauseum, so I won't go too much into that, except for any kind of remark codes that are a little different for Medicare Advantage versus Medicare. 197, that's back to our prior authorization piece, which we also talked about. It's kind of interesting that it shows up here for both commercial and Medicare Advantage plans. And then we have some comments that we'll talk about on that in terms of the latest OIG investigation into Medicare Advantage. And then we have code 252, which again, surprise, surprise, is there again. And because many Blue Cross Blue Shield plans also have Medicare Advantage plans, hence the 252. And then of course our all favorite number 496 there, which is those non-covered charts. So a lot of things are redundant here in terms of the definitions and stuff, so I'll kind of gloss over those, but we'll look closer at the remark codes because those are a little bit different, although not dramatically so. But here we go. So here are our top Medicare Advantage plan pairs using denial code 16, United Healthcare, Humana, Tennessee Blue Shield, Florida Blue Shield, and Clover Health, which is New Jersey and Georgia. Again, that's the claim service lacks some information or some sort of clerical error needed for adjudication in order for you to fix it. And here's what the remark codes are for this particular one. And interestingly, they're very similar to what we saw before, so I won't get into too much, but basically the NDC code. The other thing there is some payers will want a 10-digit, some payers will want 11-digit, and it'll depend on which payer. Most will want the 11. So you might want to check with the payer when you put that NDC code on there, because if you put a 10, they want 11, then they'll deny it for this reason. Good news is it's relatively easily rectifiable, but why go through it if you don't have to? And then the next two are very similar. So it's missing, incomplete, invalid diagnosis, or the next one after that, missing, incomplete, invalid principal diagnosis, which is basically the same thing, right? So that tends to be things like when you use the encounter code with some pairs and different things like that, and we'll get into that in a sec. So here's the ones using 197, which is that prior auth absent one, United Healthcare, Humana, HealthSpring, Illinois, which is Cigna, Aetna, and Florida Blue Shield. And we talked reasons before, but something we all wanted to talk about, and this was in Bobby's newsletter, the On Point Oncology / Bobby, what we call it the Bobby newsletter because it's really Bobby, about the Medicare Advantage OIG investigation. For those of you that don't know, Medicare OIG, which is the Office of the Inspector General, of course, decided to do an audit, for lack of a better term, of all of the Medicare Advantage prior authorizations to see if there is something there in terms of whether they fit into the what's required by Medicare itself, and if they do, why were they denied? So basically it says due to, this is from the article, due to beneficiary bribes such as gym memberships, Medicare Advantage plans have continued to grow in popularity. Enrollment has doubled since 2011. Private plans cover 42% of Medicare members last year, so meaning Medicare Advantage. And by 2030, about half of those, which would be 50% obviously, will be covered by an MA plan, and that's probably probably an underestimate, probably a little bit more than that, I would guess. So their concern, meaning OIG's concern, was that capitated payments used in Medicare Advantage is a potential incentive for Medicare Advantage organizations to deny beneficiary access to services and deny payments to providers. I don't think this comes as a huge shock to you, but just so you know. So the investigation, these are some of the details around what they were doing. They specifically looked at prior authorization and payment requests denied by plans and whether the denials were inaccurate based on Medicare coverage rules. So in other words, if they're covered by Medicare, why would they not be paid, right? They should be. They collected data from 15 of the largest Medicare Advantage plans. covering about 80% of all the Medicare Advantage enrollees, and analyzed a sample of 430 cases from the first week of June 2019 that were either a prior auth denial or a payment denial. So it does cover both. The most interesting, of course, is the prior auth. And here we go, findings of the report. So this is where the rubber hits the road. I don't think this is probably going to come to shock to too many of you, but it may. The report found that 13% of the prior authorization denials, and think about how many that is based on how many you do a day, 13% of those PA denials were for services meeting Medicare coverage rules, or in other words, were wrongly denied. And then the quote here from OIG is likely preventing or delaying medically necessary care for Medicare Advantage beneficiaries. So that's obviously bad, right? If you are preventing or delaying medically necessary care for cancer patients, that is not a good thing. And so this has been relatively exposed. We'll see what happens with this, as there is some pending legislation to make these more transparent, but we'll see about that. Among the payment requests that Medicare Advantage denied, 18%, so payment request basically is claims, 18% met Medicare coverage rules and Medicare Advantage billing rules. So another 18% should have been covered on that end, 13% on the front end. Medicare Advantage plans indicated that some prior authorization requests did not contain enough documentation, which is what we see also when we were just reviewing those denials, all about documentation, to support approval. Yet, OIG reviewers found the beneficiary medical records already in the case file were sufficient to support the medical necessity of the services. So in other words, our theory, if you will, of that code 252, for example, being a stall tactic, apparently OIG tends to agree with us. But the OIG suggested that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Service issue new guidance on appropriate clinical criteria, update audit protocols to flag issues, and take steps to identify and address vulnerabilities which may lead to errors. CMS agreed with these three recommendations. So we will see what the result of this is. Hopefully it will result in some more transparency from a Medicare Advantage standpoint. Trace, I didn't mean to leave you out. Did you want to comment on that at all, or did I cover it?
No, I think you captured everything.
All
Bottom
right,
line, get some relief on these PAs, at least on the Medicare Advantage side of the game.
Amen to that, dude. All right, code 252, speaking of which, here are our top Medicare Advantage payers, and you'll see there's some similarities again to the commercial. We have Florida Blue Shield, Alabama Blue Shield, United Healthcare, Aetna, and Anthem Blue Cross. Remember, these are just the top ones, so there are plenty of others. And again, this is for the attachment. Here are the remark codes more associated with this one, and you can see this is also very similar. So missing patient medical record, and then the two remark codes that are utilized for certificates of medical necessity. Again, sort of ties back to the prior auth process, like make them submit and then resubmit, and all the same information depending on the group. Denial code 96. So that's that non-covered charge. So here's Aetna, United Healthcare, Tennessee Blue Shield, Humana, and Florida Blue Shield. Just managed to make that one as well too, because they seem to show up everywhere. Again, this is the one where there's remark codes associated with it to tell you. There again is our LCDs, and then we have correction to a prior claim, which we already addressed as well too. And then medical record does not support the code billed per the code definition. Code billed usually refers to the procedure code / J code of the drug or something along those lines. And so they'll say the medical record didn't give us enough information. And that kind of ties back to our comments on the OIG, what the OIG said versus what Medicare Advantage said. And then so we'll obviously please file your questions. So we're going to talk about some of our top commercial payers in terms of size, so that it fits everyone, and some of the things we see with them in terms of their denials. And those are the ones that we saw on our top 4 or 5 lists that we just addressed by payer segment. We're going to talk about some specifically, and I'm going to talk about the first 2, I believe, or maybe the first one. We'll find out in a second. I can't remember. But the first one is Aetna, which we also refer to as CVS, and this is 2021, just to remind you. And when you look at Aetna, they have some very interesting denial reasons. So their number one that they use, and we find that this is almost exclusively an Aetna thing, but we see little bits and pieces from other payers using code 55, reason code 55. But we see Aetna using this across the board, meaning for a lot of different drugs, and it's very interesting. It says procedure, treatment / drug is deemed experimental / investigational by the payer. A lot of times these are legitimately investigational and experimental, but quite often they're compendia listed, and we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But the benefit for this services and payment is included in another. So this is a kind of a bundling thing where they believe it's already been paid for. And then non-covered charge, which of course is R96. And then you can see, of course, we have those 197s on there as well too. Now I'm talking about code 55. Hey, Trace, you can put it on mute, man. Code 55. So procedure, treatment, drug is deemed experimental, investigational. Here you should appeal the case based on compendia coverage, because we do see a decent amount of compendia covered drugs included in this denial reason, community standard or other scientific evidence. Make sure a physician or other provider is involved in the appeal for obvious reasons. And here are the top 5 diagnosis codes that are flagged with this code 55. And interestingly, it's multiple myeloma. So my immediate reaction to that was multiple myeloma is pretty cut and dry in terms of the drugs you use, but quite often it's the order in which you use them. Some have very specific labels saying, you have to fail twice or 3 times or 4 times or whatever it might be before you can utilize this. So that requires a decent amount of documentation. And then they'll also say, oh, you obviously didn't use drug X before you use drug Y, which is what you're billing for, and that's why it is deemed experimental. The encounter code sometimes can be a problem with, and that's the next one, C51.11. That can definitely be a problem with different payers because it doesn't specify a tumor type. And in this case with Aetna, it appears to be the case. Some practices have better success than others in terms of utilizing this, and with different payers. What we're saying here is with Aetna, it's probably not the best idea. And then you can see there's prostate, and then interestingly enough, breast cancer, probably just because that's a higher volume product. And then 64.9 anemia unspecified seems to fall into a decent amount of particularly supportive care products, but also some others where it's not really, it should be the primary diagnosis code. If we look at code 97, this says the benefit or service is included in another payment or allowance. So first, if this is Medicare and Medicaid is the secondary, they decide that the Medicare primary is more than they're allowable, they'll use this one, basically saying, hey, it's already covered. That's kind of what this code is saying in only in a more wordy fashion. Also, it's used for unbundling. So if you see unbundling repeatedly, then maybe you should stop charging bundled procedures. And then quite often, this is a duplicate claim edit where they say, oh, it's already covered because you already filed the claim and you're filing another claim and we're rejecting it. And this is also where we see some remark codes associated with this that say, you don't see a lot of remark codes that come with code 97 because it's not necessarily required, but we do see some. And then when we do see it, it tends for Aetna anyway to say procedure code is incidental to the primary procedure. So that means that they are kindly saying that you probably didn't use the correct ICD-10 code. And in some cases, particularly with the encounter code, that may be what's going on. Code 96, we already talked about what this is. Obviously, it says non-covered charge, and here's some of the remark codes that Aetna utilizes. They mention the LCD, this is particularly with the Medicare Advantage plans, of course, and then the reversal is due to a resubmission / change to the claim by the provider. So in other words, the provider provided some additional information and they said, you know what, based on this, we're going to deny it. And then correction to a prior claim, which is, we talked about as well too, which is quite often that duplicate claim that we mentioned before and some other issues that may have arisen, and then tied to that previous one as well too. Code 197, so of course this is the prior auth, and we've talked about that ad nauseum, so I won't bother you with that one too much more, and we will move on to United Healthcare, which goes to my man Tracy. Tracy, take it away.
Thank you. So yeah, and you see that on Aetna, prior auth was number 4 out of the top 4, and you'll see I'm kind of own the kings of the prior auth, which will be United Healthcare and Cigna. So as you see here, 23% of the denial reasons in our database are for prior auth with United Healthcare. So huge amounts of prior auth. And you'll see Cigna sort of shares that same, even worse, very onerous prior auth processes with these companies. And they require prior auth for pretty much everything that's expensive. So claim or service lacks information or has submission billing errors. That's number 2. Number 1 or 2 generally for all of these is these clerical errors. So we just got to clean up our processes internally. Non-covered services, the 50 again, the medical necessity denial, and then information requested was not provided or not provided in a timely manner. Next. So 197 won't beat the dead horse, but we know that obviously this is a big issue and it is huge with United Healthcare, and it's just about getting those processes and procedures around identifying what drugs are going to require the prior auth for your practice, and then what do I got to do to obtain one. Next, denial code 16, move to the next slides, show the main reasons for this. Again, missing NDC code. Now, just as commentary, so we work with pharmaceutical companies a lot, particularly field reimbursement teams that go out and try to help you guys with billing issues. And one of the things that we've been saying for the last 5 years since this started showing up, and one of the things that Bobbi's been saying ad nauseum in her newsletter, is putting these NDC codes on the claim. Paul mentioned it earlier, but it's so important because this is like so easy. And it's you just don't want to give them a reason to deny you, and just make sure it's in the proper format. Many of the revenue cycle management companies will put NDC codes for drugs in your to select from. However, just make sure that they're in the proper format. And also, some won't do it. Just know that some won't do it only because they feel like there's some sort of liability, so that they rely on you to put them in themselves when you're billing them electronically. Missing, incomplete, invalid billing provider taxonomy. This is when you sign up for Medicare, you're going to automatically put this in, and it's going to be attached to all your claims. However, with UHC, it's not. So it's kind of on you to make sure. It's another thing to have with your revenue cycle management company, to make sure that this information is already in there so that it plays forth onto your claims, every claim that you do this on, because otherwise it's on you to put it on there, and you can see that you'll get denied if you don't have it with United Healthcare. And then name, strength, dosage of drug furnished. This can be one, generally it's strength or dosage that triggers this. Next.
Hey, just a quick comment that you look at the volume of the number of denials and look at number 1 versus number 2. So to Tracy's point, it's just relatively easily rectifiable. But look at they love to use this one clearly, because it's a billion times more each time than any of the other. 4,563, and the next number 2, it's 394. So just a quick comment there. Sorry, Trace.
No, that's good. Next, denial code 50, already went through this, but same kind of deal with United Healthcare, non-covered services. And then here are the reasons. So you got your low your LCD, NCD, and then you got patients Medicaid qualified Medicare beneficiary. So just some confusion there with the check-in procedure. But you'll see that basically they're just telling you have to support the use of that drug in some fashion, or you're maybe using the wrong code that's not associated with that specific drug for that disease. Next. Now code 226, information from the bill was not provided or insufficient or incomplete. So basically it's just the payer requesting information from the provider, and the provider's response was insufficient. A lot of times this happens with new drugs. You saw that it wasn't that many of these, but generally you're looking at new drugs where you're trying to triangulate all the different things that you need to supply to a private payer to get these paid for. And you can see those are listed there: package insert, NDC number, vial size, all that. Denial code 20, here's the remark code. So missing documentation. Sometimes this is just some of those things outlined early on the previous slide, but a lot of times this is also saying that they need a copy of the patient medical record. Your claim contains incomplete or invalid information. No appeal rights are afforded. Again, this is a modifier claim, so this is attached to ones that they feel they cannot pay at all. And then sometimes they'll just tell you to resubmit the claim with a new claim with the requested information. Cigna, probably the most onerous prior auth process of the private plans. As you can see here, 197 make up 41% of their denials total. We see this with the customers that we deal with, so the pharma customers, and they see a ton of Cigna denials. So this is just part and parcel to dealing with Cigna, is that their prior auth process is just ridiculous. Benefit for this service is included in the payment or allowance for another service. Claim or service lacks information or has sufficient billing errors, the common theme here, then non-covered charge. Next. So the 197s we've discussed, the 97s, this is benefit for the service included as in the payment or allowance for another service. So this could be a secondary payer. A lot of reasons for this. It's also used for unbundling. If you can see this for unbundling repeatedly, stop charging the bundled procedures. Most often though, for a 97, it's a duplicate claim edit. We're going to get a little detail on the next one. And you'll see services are not covered when performed with the global period of another service. So perhaps in this case, it was too close before or after surgery. Not a ton of them here, only 55, but we don't get a lot of detail on the 97s, unfortunately. And then the 16s, and then go to the next one, Paul. So this is missing, incomplete or invalid insurance carrier EOB. Strength of drugs furnished, we've already seen that one, and missing EOB for coordination of benefits or Medicare secondary payer. So basically, they want to prove failure or need for the movement to another line of therapy. They're going to make you prove that with Cigna. Next, 96s. Again, don't get a lot of remark codes here, but we get a few. Not covered when deemed unscientific, unproven, outmoded, experimental, excessive, or inappropriate. That's always very helpful. And then drug or service is not included in the fee schedule. So just making sure that this drug is included. And a lot of times this is really about talking to your pharmaceutical representative, field reimbursement person, to make sure that if you see this one, that this drug, something we've seen commonly in our data where a drug will get a new indication and it doesn't get loaded with the payer. Next, Humana. Paul, you're going to take this one?
Yes, sir.
Sweet.
All right, Trace, thank you. So with Humana is an interesting one. So here we have the top denial reasons for Humana. You can see they're kind of the same as what we saw before. Interestingly, you have not only the 197 prior auth is absent, but you have the 198, which is the prior auth is exceeded. So not only are they difficult in terms of granting prior auths and a lot of hoop jumping to do, but they apparently don't grant them for a very long period of time. And certainly when you change medications, obviously you have to re-up your prior auth. But in this case, I don't think they give them for a very long period of time. And then of course, there's 96 again, which is that non-covered charge. So 16, I won't get into too much of the detail because we know we've talked about this. We see this with just about everybody. But here they're got missing, incomplete, invalid diagnosis or condition, which we actually talked about before as well too. So it's interesting where they just have some issues with the way it is coded. Again, it could very well be the encounter code in some cases. Missing, incomplete, invalid prior insurance carriers EOB, so same kind of thing to justify the coverage. And then missing, incomplete, invalid principal diagnosis, which ties back to the first one as well too. And here, of course, 197, so we know about that. We've talked about that a pretty decent amount, but you can see that's consistent not only across all payers, but across all drugs. And here it is for this one. So the prior auth has obviously been granted for a certain amount of time, and that time has been exceeded. It does vary by payer in terms of how long that is sometimes. And then obviously you need to apply as soon as possible because the patient doesn't have coverage unless the judgment is wrong. And then if there's if you need to apply for a patient assistance, unless you can get an appeal or a retroactive approval to cover the in-between, if you will, when it expired and when it starts again. 96, so we have remark codes, of course, with this, which is that non-covered charge code. So let's see what they tend to use for Humana. Not covered with this procedure, doesn't tell you a whole heck of a lot, but it probably ties back to the billing code used. And sometimes it's obviously off-label, but maybe, again, might be a compendia thing. Exceeds number / frequency approved, allowed within time period. That's quite often a dosing schedule. So if you see the patient early or late or whatever, because the patient went on vacation or something, you might see something like this remark code in your denials. And then, of course, we have our local coverage decision based on various different factors. And then we're going to talk to you a little bit about the payer report card. And so, Tracy, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so now just to summarize kind of what we've gone through here is just kind of by payer segment, showing you guys, what happens across the country, on a daily basis with all of these denials. We wanted to share with you guys some of the metrics that we have and sort of like our wall of shame or wall of fame, however you want to call it. So overall in 2021, and, we know in the buy and bill space, you're looking to at least make sure that these drugs are paid for within 30 days. We are seeing that most plans do fall within this. Obviously there's going to be variations outside of this, but as an overall days to pay, so the date of service, the actual date the patient was seen to the actual payment date, only United Healthcare was averaging over 31 days. And then next slide, just looking at a true denial percentage, which true denial for us is basically a denial that you could do something about. With the largest distinct patient group, we saw Arkansas Blue Shield with a gigantic denial rate. We've heard from a number of people, it's just so bizarre that Arkansas has the worst Blue Shield payer in the country. And then Florida Blue checking in next. Again, they have some of that Magellan activity, I think, that goes on top of this, where Paul was mentioning earlier about, not only are you having to provide the copy of the patient medical record, but you're also having to provide certificate of medical necessity. California Medicare, interestingly, on this list as well, I think that speaks to more of, at least in the early stages of this year, just a lot of turnover in billing offices. We're seeing a lot of California claims being denied from a number of different payers. California Medicare just sort of leads the list as a large distinct patient group. United Healthcare and Aetna and Cigna always in the top. Humana actually has improved their game over the past year. They're not up here anymore. They used to be. Tennessee Blue pulling in there. Next. And then highest days to pay. Again, a lot of this stuff, again, I think has to do with just turnover in the billing office, driving some of these days to pay way up, higher than they should be, because this should not be as high for California Medicare or Alabama Medicare for that matter. But you can also see that some of these plans with large patient groups have, some of the biggest days to pay. Again, we would want to stay, the good here is 30. So you can see these are quite outside the norm. And that is it.
Yes, it is.
And we appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tracy and Paul, for the information. And thank you all again for attending today's webinar. We hope you found the content informational and helpful. As a reminder, all of today's attendees will receive the webinar recording along with the slide presentation. We do have a few moments for questions, if Paul and Tracy are willing. So would you guys like to read those, or would you like me to read you some?
You can read us some.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Sure thing. 1 second.
Hopefully we can answer them. Now, I'll just
That
blame
is the
Tracy.
goal. First question is from Patrice. The question is, can you speak to use of infusion biologics, i.e. chemotherapy agents used for rheumatology and not just oncology?
The answer is sort of. We pull our data from oncology practices. There are some drugs that are utilized for rheumatology that are given in oncology practices. So we do have some limited data on that, but it's certainly not as extensive as it is in oncology. So that's something we could look at the next time. Sorry, Trace, go ahead.
No, we do want to expand into other buy and bill specialties. Unfortunately, they aren't, I'd say rheumatology is oncology 12 years ago. So, and claims data is out there for us to analyze, so we can go and source those from the clearinghouses like Relay Health and stuff. And definitely, I think rheumatology is our next frontier. So we do want to do that for rheumatology and urology. But the good news is I think most of these in the rheumatology space, a lot of this, you'll probably have the same sort of experience with the same types of denials with your drugs.
Oh, for sure.
Great, thank you. Another question from Lori. Don't you find that if you submit the patient record at time of claim rather than when requested, they just discard it and ask you to send it again after they review the claim?
The short answer, yes. Longer answer is it does occur with particular payers. We see it. Harmony Health Plan, which isn't part of this because they have WellCare plans and some others. That's the one we hear the most about from practices saying we submit it, and for some reason they claim they don't get it, and then it's submitted 2, 3, and 4 times. Hence their denial rates are extreme. But we do also see that with other payers as well too from time to time where it's been submitted and they say, oh no, we don't have it. So that's definitely a problem. How to resolve that, I'm not sure, other than talking to the payer directly, but we did have some experience with that occurring a few years ago. And the response from that particular payer was, we said, oh, you require the full patient medical record with the submission and claim. And their answer was, no, we don't. And that's pretty much it. Trace, you got any comments on it?
Yeah, no, it's just, and it's specific to some payers. Some payers are very accepting and take that, and you don't get denied. And other payers use it as a delay tactic. Frankly, that's what I think they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. That's where that 252 comes in.
Yep.
Great, and I think we have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, I just said hopefully that's a good answer for you.
Thanks. We have time for one more question. If you didn't have your question answered during this webinar, we will reach out with a one-on-one. Feel free to email us other questions and we will respond to them via email. The last question is from Fran. The question is, when you have an automatic crossover from Medicare to a commercial insurance and the CPT codes are different, how do you address this?
CPT codes are different. Boy, that's a good question.
We're going to ask Fran to submit that question to Bobbi.
Yeah, well, wait, what? So they're going from Medicare to commercial? Or you mean Medicare to Medicare Advantage, I guess. That would be my clarifying question. Obviously, it must be.
Or it could be a secondary, Medicare with a secondary.
Yeah. Within the CPT codes change. Oh, yeah, right, because you're switching from one payer segment to the other. We'll have to get back to you on that one.
Taylor, just get that question and Fran's email address if you can, and we'll answer it and get back to her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, I will send these questions over after the webinar. You guys should be.
One more? You can ask one more. It's 1:58.
You want one more? Okay, sounds good.
I don't want to end on that note.
Okay, fair enough. Let's see. Delena's question is, she said multiple denials from Humana MC for Rituxan used in non-Hodgkin's. Denial states per Medicare, NCD, LCD, or LCA. No NCD, LCD, or LCA for oncologic indications, but use is valid per Humana's own clinical policy. Pre-cert was obtained with DX on claims. Thoughts for how to proceed. And I did send this in the chat for you both to see if you would like to read it for yourselves.
Oh, okay, we'll have to take a look at that. But that's interesting, and it sounds like you crossed every T and dotted every I, and you're still being denied, which of course is not unusual, unfortunately. But that's clearly where the payer is taking their sweet time trying to figure that out, and they're not telling you what it sounds like you're also saying there's no published policy for an LCD or NCD. So we'll have to look all that stuff up and get back to you on that one as well too. Before we end, I do want to mention, Taylor, can you just kind of tell them when the next webinar is so that they're aware what our next one is?
Sure, it is in July. I do not have the date right in front of me, but I will be sending out emails in the coming weeks about the next one.
Yes, so please look for those people, and thanks so much, everyone, for attending.
Yes, thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.